Georgia's history spans millennia, beginning with the indigenous peoples who first inhabited the region over 12,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence from sites like the Meadowcroft rock shelter suggests Paleo-Indian cultures thrived in the southeastern United States during the last Ice Age. These early inhabitants were hunter-gatherers who adapted to the changing climate as glaciers retreated. The Archaic period saw the development of more sophisticated societies. Native Americans began cultivating plants, creating pottery, and establishing permanent settlements along Georgia's rivers and coastal areas. The Woodland period brought further advances, including the construction of burial mounds and the development of agriculture centered around the Three Sisters crops: corn, beans, and squash. By 1000 CE, the Mississippian culture had emerged, characterized by complex chiefdoms and impressive earthwork constructions. The most significant site in Georgia was Etowah, near present-day Cartersville, which served as a major ceremonial and political center. These societies were highly organized, with sophisticated trade networks extending across the southeast. When European explorers arrived in the 16th century, Georgia was home to numerous Native American tribes. The Cherokee dominated the northern mountains, while the Creek Confederacy controlled much of central Georgia. The Seminole inhabited the southern regions, and various smaller tribes occupied the coastal areas. The Cherokee developed one of the most advanced Native American societies in North America. They established a constitutional government, created a written language through Sequoyah's syllabary, and published the first Native American newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix. Their capital at New Echota became a symbol of Cherokee adaptation to European-style governance while maintaining their cultural identity. The Creek Confederacy, led by figures like Alexander McGillivray, represented a complex alliance of tribes that successfully negotiated with European powers and early American governments. They developed a sophisticated diplomatic approach, playing European nations against each other to maintain their independence and territorial integrity. Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto first traversed Georgia in 1540, encountering thriving Native American civilizations. The Spanish established missions along the coast, including Santa Catalina on St. Catherine's Island, which became a center for converting Native Americans to Christianity. These missions represented the first sustained European presence in Georgia, lasting until the late 17th century when English raids from South Carolina forced their abandonment. The English showed little interest in Georgia until the early 18th century. General James Oglethorpe, motivated by both humanitarian and strategic concerns, proposed establishing a colony that would serve as a buffer between English South Carolina and Spanish Florida, while providing a fresh start for England's worthy poor and debtors. In 1732, King George II granted Oglethorpe a charter to establish the province of Georgia, named in the monarch's honor. The colony was unique among the 13 colonies as it was founded by a board of trustees rather than a joint stock company or proprietor. The trustees envisioned an egalitarian society where slavery was prohibited, alcohol was banned, and land grants were limited to prevent the concentration of wealth. Oglethorpe arrived with the first settlers in 1733, establishing Savannah as the colony's first city. The town's distinctive grid pattern and public squares reflected Oglethorpe's vision of an orderly, planned community. The early years were challenging, with colonists struggling to adapt to the subtropical climate and establish profitable crops. The trustees' idealistic vision gradually gave way to economic reality. The prohibition on slavery was lifted in 1750, and the colony was transformed into a royal colony in 1752. Rice cultivation, introduced by enslaved Africans who brought their agricultural knowledge, became the foundation of Georgia's economy. The coastal regions developed a plantation system similar to South Carolina's, while the interior remained largely unsettled. The indigo plant, promoted by Eliza Lucas Pinckney, provided another cash crop that thrived in Georgia's climate. The colony's population grew steadily, reaching approximately 40,000 by 1775, with enslaved people comprising about 40% of the population. This demographic shift fundamentally altered Georgia's social structure and economic development. Georgia's path to revolution was more complex than other colonies. The royal government had been relatively benign, and many Georgians initially opposed separation from Britain. However, the colony gradually joined the revolutionary cause with the first provincial congress meeting in 1775. The Revolutionary War in Georgia was particularly brutal, characterized by guerrilla warfare and fierce loyalist opposition. The British captured Savannah in 1778 and controlled much of the colony until 1782. The war devastated Georgia's economy and population, with many loyalists fleeing to Florida or the West Indies. Notable Georgian revolutionaries included Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton, who signed the Declaration of Independence. The state's most famous Revolutionary War hero was Nancy Hart, whose legendary exploits became part of Georgia folklore. The war's aftermath left Georgia economically devastated but politically independent. Georgia ratified the U.S. Constitution on January 2, 1788, becoming the fourth state to join the Union. The state's early political development was marked by tensions between coastal elites and frontier settlers, conflicts that would shape Georgia politics for generations. The invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney in 1793 revolutionized Georgia's economy. Cotton became the dominant crop, and the plantation system expanded rapidly across the interior. This development intensified the demand for enslaved labor, and Georgia's slave population grew from about 29,000 in 1790 to over 460. By 1860, the early 19th century saw Georgia as territorial expansion as the state acquired Creek and Cherokee lands through a series of treaties, often obtained through coercion or fraud. The discovery of gold in North Georgia in 1828 intensified pressure for Cherokee removal, leading to the tragic Trail of Tears in 1838 to 1839. Cities like Augusta, Columbus, and Macon emerged as commercial centers, connected by rivers and later railroads. The Western and Atlantic Railroad, completed in the 1850s, linked Atlanta to Chattanooga, Tennessee, making Atlanta a crucial transportation hub. This period of expansion created enormous wealth for plantation owners while deepening the state's dependence on slavery. By 1860, Georgia had become one of the most prosperous and politically influential states in the South. The state's political leaders, including Alexander Stephens and Robert Toombs, initially opposed secession but eventually supported it after Lincoln's election. Georgia seceded from the Union on January 19, 1861, and joined the Confederacy. The Civil War brought devastation to Georgia. The state provided approximately 120,000 soldiers to the Confederate cause and served as a crucial supplier of food and materials. Atlanta became a major Confederate industrial center, producing weapons, ammunition, and supplies. The war's most dramatic chapter in Georgia was General William T. Sherman's Atlanta campaign and march to the sea in 1864. Sherman's forces captured Atlanta in September 1864, then marched to Savannah, destroying railroads, mills, and plantations in a 60-mile-wide swath. This campaign devastated Georgia's economy and demonstrated the Confederacy's inability to protect its territory. The Civil War's end brought emancipation and the beginning of Reconstruction. Georgia was readmitted to the Union in 1870 after ratifying the 14th and 15th Amendments. The Reconstruction era saw the brief political participation of formerly enslaved people. who elected representatives to the legislature and helped establish the state's first public school system. However, Reconstruction's promise was short-lived. The end of federal oversight in 1877 led to the systematic disenfranchisement of black Georgians through poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation. The convict lease system and sharecropping replaced slavery as methods of controlling black labor. The New South movement, promoted by leaders like Henry Grady of the Atlanta Constitution, advocated for industrial development and economic diversification. Atlanta emerged as the region's leading city, earning the nickname Gate City of the South. Textile mills sprouted across the state, particularly in the Piedmont region, providing employment for poor whites while maintaining racial segregation. The early 1900s brought both progress and turmoil to Georgia. The state's agriculture was devastated by the boll weevil, which destroyed cotton crops and forced many farmers to abandon their land. This agricultural crisis coincided with increased racial tensions, exemplified by the 1906 Atlanta race massacre, which shocked the nation and highlighted the depths of racial animosity. World War I brought economic opportunities as military bases and defense industries expanded. However, the post-war period saw continued racial violence and the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which gained significant political influence in Georgia during the 1920s. The Great Depression hit Georgia particularly hard, as the state's agricultural economy collapsed. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs provided some relief, and the president's residence in Warm Springs gave Georgia national attention. The Civilian Conservation Corps and Works Progress Administration employed thousands of Georgians in public works projects. World War II transformed Georgia's economy and society. Military bases like Fort Benning, Robins Air Force Base, and the Savannah Shipyard employed hundreds of thousands of workers. The Bell Aircraft Plant in Marietta produced B-29 bombers, while the state's ports handled massive shipments of war materials. The war accelerated urbanization and industrialization while beginning to erode the rigid racial caste system. African American servicemen returned from overseas with new expectations for equality, setting the stage for the Civil Rights Movement. Georgia played a crucial role in the Civil Rights Movement. The state was the birthplace of Martin Luther King Jr., whose leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott and founding of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference made him the movement's most prominent figure. Atlanta became known as the city too busy to hate as it peacefully integrated its schools and public facilities. However, rural Georgia remained strongly resistant to change. The state's political system, dominated by the county unit system, gave disproportionate power to rural areas and segregationist politicians like Eugene Talmadge and Lester Maddox. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 forced Georgia to dismantle its segregation laws and ensure voting rights for all citizens. The late 20th century saw Georgia's transformation into a modern, diversified state. The Civil Rights Movement's success opened opportunities for African Americans, who began winning elected offices and participating fully in the state's economic development. Andrew Young became the first African American elected to Congress from Georgia since Reconstruction, and later served as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and Mayor of Atlanta. The 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta showcased Georgia's emergence as an international city. The Games brought significant investment in infrastructure and established Atlanta as a major convention and tourism destination. The success of the Olympics symbolized Georgia's transition from a predominantly rural, agricultural state to a modern, urban economy. Today, Georgia is one of the fastest-growing states in the nation, with a diverse economy centered on agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and services. Atlanta has become the unofficial capital of the Southeast, home to major corporations like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, and Delta Airlines. The state's film industry has grown dramatically, earning Georgia the nickname Hollywood of the South. Georgia's political landscape has evolved significantly, becoming increasingly competitive in national elections. The state's growing diversity, driven by international immigration and domestic migration, has created new political dynamics. The 2020 presidential election and subsequent Senate races demonstrated Georgia's emergence as a pivotal swing state. The state continues to grapple with challenges including income inequality, educational disparities, and racial tensions. However, Georgia's history of resilience and adaptation suggests it will continue to play an important role in shaping America's future. From its origins as a haven for debtors to its current status as a dynamic, diverse state, Georgia's history reflects the broader American experience of struggle, growth, and transformation. The story of Georgia encompasses the full spectrum of American history: Native American civilizations, European colonization, slavery, and freedom, war and peace, segregation and integration, rural traditions and urban innovation. This rich and complex history continues to influence Georgia's development as it moves forward into the 21st century, building on its past while embracing new opportunities and challenges.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.